Within hours of the landmark meeting between President Trump and Prime Minister Modi in Washington, top US leaders are rushing to Munich for talks, which may end the war between Ukraine and Russia. This follows lengthy conversations between President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin. Direct negotiations are expected to take place soon, with the US side absolutely clear that there have to be results and an agreement to end the war. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is in Munich as well. The US is being led by Vice President J.D. Vance, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien. Ahead of the talks, the US Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth has made a few key points that appear to have led the framework to the talks. In fact, my colleague Vishnu Shom joins me live now from Munich. Vishnu, how has the Kremlin responded to the US announcement?
Well, the Kremlin has been very positive about the talks, and they've said that they, more than anybody else, want the war to actually end. Now, the exact contours of all of this will be decided over here in Munich. It's very early in the morning. It's starting to snow over here. But expect all the American top leaders, with the exception of Donald Trump, to be over here. We expect very high-level representation from the Russians as well to bring an end to this war. Putin has indicated that he actually wants to do that. He's had a very positive conversation a couple of days back with President Donald Trump. So we do expect something to happen, and the Americans are absolutely adamant there has to be a peace deal which comes off this.
Right, Vishnu, how is this, explain for our viewers, how is this the biggest and most focused peace process to date as far as the Russia-Ukraine conflict is concerned?
Well, for starters, it is because you've got Trump speaking to Putin. They've had a very long conversation. They would have discussed the contours, which, you mentioned. And let me just go through those contours. Firstly, it has been indicated by Pete Hegseth of the United States that it's unlikely that there would be a return to the 2014 boundaries of Ukraine. Remember, we say that the Ukraine war started a couple of years back. In fact, the fight between Russia and Ukraine started in 2014 when Russia invaded Crimea. At this stage, Russian forces are pushing west in the Donetsk and the Luhansk region. The Ukrainians are trying to push them back east. So it's unlikely that there would be a restoration of the 2014 boundaries, number one. Number two, America has said that if there are peacekeepers, then it will not be American boots on the ground in the Ukraine. So those are two important grounds. And very importantly, the European nations have to be in charge of ensuring the defense of Ukraine. America will only do so much. Remember, America has put in billions of dollars worth of weaponry, which has propelled the Ukrainians to where they are right now. Trump seems to indicate that, look, we want peace now. Millions of people have lost their lives, more cannot die, and therefore this war needs to come to an end. But there has to be a robust security agreement on the basis of the negotiations at the Munich security talks, which are taking place and which get underway in a couple of hours from now.
Very importantly also, Vishnu, if you can highlight what role does Ukraine have in these talks?
Well, I think that's a key point, because the talks have taken place between Putin and between Trump and Putin. Where is Ukraine in all of this? Remember, Ukraine has had a very hardline position. They've always said that, look, we need to absolutely ensure that we regain our territorial integrity. But I think Zelensky has been told in no clear terms by the US leadership, look, enough is enough. This fighting has to end. The bloodbath has to end. This has been one of the bloodiest wars since the Second World War. So Zelensky on his way to Munich, I would assume that he would be here very, very soon to be a part of these talks. They would certainly have their view of what is acceptable and what is not. But I think in line with the statements made by the US Vice President J.D. Vance, who is leading the US delegation, and indeed Trump before that, the Ukrainians will be told that this is what you will accept, this is what will go, and you're certainly a critical part, it is your country, of this peace process, but the war has to come to an end right away.
Right, and finally, Vishnu, if I can ask you one more question, where does the war stand presently, if you can contextualize that for our viewers?
Well, millions have lost their lives on both sides. It's been one of the most bloody wars that we've seen, as I mentioned, since the Second World War. The Ukrainian forces have pushed north into the Kursk region of Russia. And as I mentioned, the Donetsk and the Luhansk, which is in the east of Ukraine, is where there is a lot of fighting that's been taking place. It's a strange kind of war. On the one hand, you've got extremely high-tech missile attacks which are taking place. On the other hand, you've got trench warfare also taking place. The capture of land by the Russians and the Ukrainians pushing them back sometimes goes down to just a few meters, a few hundred meters every couple of days. So that's where the war stands primarily. Crimea is another area which is under Russian occupation, where the Ukrainians have been attacking as well. The loss of Russian soldiers, Russian equipment has been absolutely mammoth. But at the end of the day, the Russians can likely outlast the Ukrainians in terms of soldiers who are deployed. And that is perhaps the biggest problem the Ukrainians face. They cannot stretch the war for as long as the Russians can, which is why I think there is a sense that, look, it now has to come to an end. What will Ukraine be able to gain out of this? How much of their territory will be restored? Those are the key points that are going to be coming up.